Well, here we go. Second half of this college football season for the University of Washington. A little dog talk with Brock as the Huskies will get on the plane yet again and head out east for the third time. Rutgers on a Friday night, Iowa on a Saturday morning, now Bloomington, Indiana on a Saturday morning. Let's hope for the Husky fans that are making their way out there that maybe the third time will be the charm and that they've learned a little something with these two earlier trips. I know we had Jedd Fisch on our show earlier this morning. We'll get to a couple pieces of sound from him specifically about this matchup and also what they learned during their self-scouting. But he did make that a point of emphasis, that only experience, right? This is the first time for all these West Coast schools traveling this many times in the Big Ten Conference out east, and every one of these trips has got to be a growth opportunity, right? An opportunity to learn what you liked, what you didn't like. He said very clearly, we are going to change some things from the practice schedule, and having the guys ready to go did not feel like as a staff they were on point. As players, they were on point in Iowa City, and hopefully it will be a different situation in Bloomington for those Huskies Saturday morning. What I learned, what I think, what I know. Coming off of the bye week, heading into this matchup with now a top 10 undefeated, it's so crazy to say that, 7-0 Indiana Hoosier team, where game day and ESPN will be in full effect out there for the first time in the history of game day, making a trip out to Indiana. What I've learned, what I think, what I know. What I learned during that bye week and what I have learned in preparation for this week in this matchup is that the Huskies, actually statistically speaking, find themselves in some pretty rarefied air. They are a top 20 team on offense when it comes to yards per play, 19th in the country in yards per play. They are a top 10 team in the country on yards per play against defensively. Throwing those two things together, there are very few teams in college football that can match that. Top 20 offense, top 10 defense in yards per play. It is the likes of Penn State, it is the likes of Ohio State, and it is the likes of Ole Miss. That is it in the University of Washington. When it comes to statistically speaking, a stat that the gamblers certainly all love out there, yards per play. And what that tells you is these guys have moved the ball up and down the field offensively, and in pretty significant spurts defensively have stopped their opponent, save for obviously Caleb Johnson in Iowa, who ran crazy on them in that morning kick a couple weeks ago before the bye week. They've done a pretty good job defensively, and that will be key because, you know, when you look at this Indiana team, they have not faced an offense all season long as dynamic and as productive as this crew. When we chatted with Jedd Fisch, that's a little bit of what I've learned about these Huskies. When we chatted with Jedd Fisch this morning, again, on the Brock and Salk show, asked him during this bye week, how do you handle it? How did you evaluate yourselves? What were you looking at? Anything jump out to you, Jedd, from a self-scouting standpoint of what you guys have done well, what's got to be corrected? Here was the head coach of the University of Washington this morning talking about exactly what he and his staff have learned along the way.
You know, when you looked at what we did, we were able to, you know, kind of see how we were moving the ball in between the 20s and then kind of looking at what we can do to, number one, if we're kicking field goals, get them in the, you know, goalpost. If we're going for touchdowns, how do we get in the end zone? And then how do we keep some drives alive on offense on third down? And then defensively, I looked at the rush defense and see how we can get a little bit better there. And then also kind of look at what we can do to take the ball away. You know, we've only taken the ball away, I think, 6 times all year, and we've only turned it over 5 times all year. So we're sitting at +1, but if we turn it over 5 times in 7 games, we need to be better than +1.
So that's what Jedd has learned. That is what I have learned. Here is what I think heading into this matchup. I think these Indiana Hoosiers are ripe for an upset. I think the Huskies are coming off of a bye week and have Durfee healthy, have Jonah Coleman healthy, have an O-line healthy. I think the bye week could not have come at a better time after a couple of those trips out east, again, to Rutgers and Iowa, and the physical beating that the Hawkeyes put on those Huskies, especially that front seven and the big old slice of humble pie that went into that bye week. But I think that number, especially, I'm not going to say I predict an upset win, and I know the Michigan line moved back and forth, and in the end, they were actually a 1-point favorite in that thing. But let's face it, from a national perspective, they were an underdog and they won that game. I'm not predicting the same kind of win, but I am predicting a cover. I think you are ripe with 6.5 to 7 points in this spread in Indiana, and who knows? I think a one-score game possibly a win in Indiana, which would go a long ways for these Huskies to get to a bowl. But I think this is going to be a one-possession game, and if you give me those 6.5 or 7 points, I will take Washington in it. For everything I just said about the Huskies, getting healthy across their roster, bye week could not come at a better time, eating a little bit of humble pie heading into and coming out of a bye week, and then ultimately playing an opponent, and this is the key here, playing an opponent that is handling prosperity in a way they've never had to handle it before. All of the national eyes will be there. Game day will be there. All the attention will be there. All the praise has been upon them. And oh, by the way, they're going to be without their starting quarterback, the guy who's been the straw that really stirred the drink for that whole crew, the MAC Player of the Year, Rourke, that is out with a thumb injury that he incurred during the Nebraska game in the first half. So you get a little bit of a wounded Indiana team. You do not get as rested an Indiana team. You get an Indiana team handling all of this noise and outside noise and prosperity. Yeah, I think this is I think that's a very, very favorable number for the Huskies, and would not be surprised at all if they come out of Bloomington finding a way to win that game. What I learned, what I think, and then ultimately what I do know. What I do know about Curt Cignetti, not easy to say, Curt Cignetti, the head coach at Indiana, what I do know is that dude is tough, and that dude has been a winner, and a winner everywhere he's been. In some ways, he has a little Kalen DeBoer to me, where Kalen DeBoer just won. No matter what level he was at, no matter where he was, his resume and his track record was he was a winner. Now, Kalen DeBoer was a little humble about that and wouldn't tell you about it. Curt Cignetti says, Google me. All I do is win. So maybe the outward approach a little bit different, but the bottom line results is I know he wins. I know that 56-7 over Nebraska was real in front of the whole country with the big noon kickoff guys there last week. I know that was real. And this is an important part of it. While Jedd Fisch was hired a little over 9 months ago, he did not really have the winter portal to put anything together. He really brought no high school kids with him other than the ones that were committed to him at Arizona because of the late timing in the hiring cycle, and they tried to take advantage of the spring portal as best they could in the summer portal. Curt Cignetti out there in Hoosierville was doing an unbelievable job. And if you listen to Jedd Fisch talk about how he has done it, how he's developed this culture, how they find themselves a top team and undefeated right now. Again, Jedd Fisch on with Brock and Salk this morning talking about the culture and the grown-up culture and the production that Curt Cignetti brought with him from James Madison right up there to Bloomington, Indiana.
It's everything they're doing right now is they're doing at a high level. But let's start with that in regards to how they're playing in all three phases. Number one. Number two, I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed about their program is they brought 13 starters from his culture, and that's huge. They're able to really get spring ball. 95% of the roster participated in spring ball with them. So they were able to really utilize the winter portal by him getting hired November 30th. Huge advantage for that group. He was able to he emphasized bringing in production over potential in the portal, and I think he did that really marvelously well.
So a tough, veteran, productive team in Indiana, riding high at 7-0 against a bunch of newbies, a put-together culture, a melting pot of players from Arizona, Washington, transfers that are still in some ways trying to find themselves and play a complete four-quarter game like they did against Michigan. That is what is going to be tangling again early, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. on the body clock of those Huskies when they kick it off against Indiana on Saturday. I'll say it for the third, fourth, fifth time. I like this number. I like this matchup. I like a healthy Husky team going in there hungry, knowing this is one they've got to get with a USC, with a Penn State, with an Oregon, really only UCLA, the only game they could be, maybe should be favored in down the stretch. You want to go to a bowl game? This is one you've got to get in Bloomington, Indiana. And I think the Huskies have got a great shot in this particular matchup against a team that's a little bit beat up, against a team that doesn't have their quarterback, and against a program that's got to handle some prosperity for the first time ever. Should be a good one Saturday morning.